So, thanks. Small talk, but a good talk, hopefully. So, my name is Robin. I mentioned just a few moments ago that I did a TED Talk. It was about a couple of weeks ago. And there's a little bit of that TED Talk embedded in this talk. So, I'm going to give you a trigger warning at the moment. I'm not going to show any footage during the duration of this talk, but I will show some footage from a VR game that I made, and it'll be mentioned. Come on in. It'll be mentioned in the middle of the presentation, but I won't play the footage, gameplay footage from that until the end, to give anybody the opportunity that if you don't, want to see it, you can walk out. But I thought I didn't want to do it in the middle because I didn't want anybody to miss out on the whole presentation and stuff like that. So we'll just wait. Right. Okay, so this is about diversity and personality, and how it can create the right setting for innovation and innovative concepts. Or, if you like to think of it as take a step to the F, right? So, and I see the reason why I chose personality and chose originally to investigate it was because I was noticing some common themes in game development that crossed across gender as well as race and age. So that's why I'm raising it with you now. So this talk is not about technology, and it's not about gameplay. It's about the people who use the tech and the gameplay to innovate, and the culture of demographic of game creation. Now, the development teams that innovate, they're diverse. They're diverse in gender, age, race, and personalities. And these game developers could be your grandmother, they could be your sister, they could be your nephew, and they could be your son, and they could be me. So now I've just got to get the cursor right. All right, so here are the people I made car racing games with about 12 years ago. Right, good team. A couple of you will recognize some of the people in these. I feel like it's been an ex-rack baggers convention whilst I've been here. Do you notice anything unusual about this team photo? There. Exactly. You're right. I'm the only woman in the production team. And back then, this was normal. Only 1 in 10 game developers were women. And nowadays, it's more like 2 in 10. So I'm talking about the production team. That's okay, cool. Do you notice anything else that's unusual? Or maybe not so unusual, but do you notice anything else? A lot of white people. Okay, so we have white males. Guess in the age range.
Between 20 and 40?
Yeah, between 18, most of them are between 18 and 35. Okay, so there are some youngies there. The photo actually expands beyond this. There are more game developers on either side. It just didn't, unfortunately, capture all my colleagues. Now, according to the IGDA, the International Game Association, Developers Association, this is the normal game developer demographic, by the way. So this is just representative of the status quo. Now, there were other women who worked for the studio, and we actively recruited for gender diversity, but they rarely lasted for more than a year. And I'll come back to why later. Just after this photo was taken, we started work on the Dukes of Hazzard game. And did I make a difference to the team's creative output by having this one female? In the production team, maybe, but maybe not. But I don't think there would have been 2 missions starring Daisy Duke and her driving skills if I hadn't been part of the design team. All right? So that's the team. So other than being female, I had another point of difference from the rest of my production team. I exhibited a strong feeling trait in the Myers-Briggs personality typology. In contrast, the majority of my colleagues exhibited a strong thinking trait. There is, which is also normal in software engineering, where introversion, intuition, thinking, and judging personality types are predominant. So, how many of you have heard about the Myers-Briggs typology, by the way? Okay, good. So that's good. If you haven't, this is it in a nutshell. It's a symbolic language used to communicate people's personalities. People complete a questionnaire. It's designed to measure their psychological preferences and how they perceive the world and make decisions. And generally, we have a preference for either extroversion or introversion, sensing or judging, feeling or thinking, judging or perceiving. So it's sensing or intuition. So this is the range, and in combination, we can be categorized into 16 different personality types. And the INTJs and the ENTJs, as I said before, are what we often find in software engineers. Now, this is just not a guess. The University of Sheffield did a study for 12 years. They studied software engineers in team projects. And they found that INTJs and ENTJs profiled the most often. And after that, it was the INTPs and the ENTPs. So definitely the NT personality types or traits were prevalent. And what's really interesting, and this is what I found quite interesting, was that what the University of Sheffield researchers also noticed was when they found they had a female INTJ programmer in one of the teams. And there was little to no differentiation in the product development or the product output compared to the all-male teams with the same personality type. So female INTJs. The team operated normally. As well, normally in the context of the other computer software engineers they were studying. However, when a female NFJ worked in one of the software engineering teams, there was significant disruption, there was heated exchanges, loud discussions, and this upset the NTJs very much. Okay? So she was a feeling. So she was the NFJ. I forget if I think she was an ENFJ. Which, as you can see in this particular chart, is the engaging mobilizer. All right, so a lot of loud discussion, a lot of heated exchanges, and it was the researchers who noticed this, and they put it down to gender. And then what also was quite interesting was that the INTJ female programmer fit in fine, and her male colleagues didn't start treating her differently until they started having fights with the NFJ programmer. And then they started treating the INTJ programmer differently. All right. So now at this point, you should know that I am an ENFJ. And I'm only just now starting to realize the hell I put my thinking colleagues through during our time in production. Now I'm going to introduce you to another ENFJ. She's a game designer, and her name is Marta. And this is a little bit of trigger warning because I'm just going to narrate a story. I'm going to narrate her story. All right? So up until recently, I was living and I was working in Europe. I was making games, I was teaching game design, and I was doing some PhD research. Now, Marta's Spanish, and she was living in the Netherlands at the time. She asked me to mentor her through the design phase of her virtual reality game. And I was the only female game designer that she knew, and I think that's why she asked me to mentor her. And her game went like this. So you start 1 year after a sexual assault, and you play backwards through time until the moment of your attack. In the end, you have no control of your character, you cannot move because the attacker has you pinned to the ground, and you are powerless. Now, this is a screenshot from Marta's prototype. The game is called Autumn. All right, so I'm not going to play the prototype footage. I'm going to do that at the end. But this is the screenshot. Can you see that? All right, so that's from a moment in the game. It was made on the Oculus, the DK2, right? So at this point, you should know that both of us, Marta and myself, we were sexually assaulted. All right, my attack was 12 years ago. It was just before that photo with my production team was taken. And hers was more recent. And so making this game was not easy for us, all right? We cried a lot during the design phase, and we relived our nightmares over and over again. But she had a problem to address, and I was on board with her. She wanted people to understand, and we wanted people to experience, you know, what it's like to be a trauma survivor. We thought maybe it would help our colleagues, our friends and our family understand us, and we actually thought it would help us understand us, and that's called exposure therapy. So she did quite a lot of research into exposure therapy. Now, obviously, I wouldn't recommend someone do this without a psychologist if this has actually happened to you, but it is therapy that is used with PTSD, people from war, as well as, you know, other people who suffered trauma. She didn't publish the game, by the way. The timing wasn't right. So Gamergate was in full swing. I presume, do we know what Gamergate is? Yeah, there's some nods, okay. Some people don't, all right. It's an online misogynistic movement that targets women in the game industry. So Zoe Quinn, who made Depression Quest, she was like the first target, and I would soon follow. And you don't want to publish, let alone put yourself out there in the community around that time. So that was a couple of years ago. I have been in communication with her, with Marta, and as a result, because I had to get permission to talk about her, let alone put her photo up, right? And talk about her game. And she said, you know, she's going to take courage from that, and she's going to publish the game. And it's going to be published next year on Vive, which is awesome. Now, she took a traumatic life experience, and she had the courage to make a game out of it. And it was emotional to make, and it's even more emotional to play. Now, I don't know if Autumn would have been made if the designers, if we didn't have feeling traits. And those feeling traits dominated our design team, right? So this is just another example of non-traditional game-making personality making games. Here's another example, all right, of tackling difficult gameplay situations. So I'm in Europe. Again, this is a few years ago, about 2. And my male colleagues and myself are asked to make a digital game for 70 to 80-year-olds, all right, 70 to 80-year-olds. And the objective is to get the seniors out of their homes or care facilities for a few hours each week, all right? My colleagues who are very experienced, by the way, in the games industry, we're talking like Tomb Raider here, said, no, it's not a game. It can't be done. You know, and I can understand where they're coming from. 80-year-olds don't play games for a start. Maybe cards, bridge, or bingo, but they're not going to want a digital game. And this is not what our teams want to make. So it was put on the back burner for like about 6 months. And the social entrepreneur who originally asked us to do it, he came back and he said, okay, I'll put some money on the table. I'll put some skin in the game. And it was quite substantial. And he said, we'll pay you just for a prototype. You know, if it doesn't work out, we'll move on. And again, it was put to my colleagues and myself, very experienced colleagues, and they put their collective feet down and they said, nah, this is not a game. Don't want to waste your time. We don't want to waste your money. We don't want to waste our time. And this is not what we signed up for when we became game developers. So I said, yeah, I'll do it. All right. So I sent out an appeal to the game writing students that I was teaching at a time. at that time, because I said like I said before, I was teaching. And I said, who feels like brainstorming a game for our grandparents? And several young women put their hands up, and a couple of young men, and they said, yeah, we'd like to be in on that. And I persuaded one very brave 60-year-old to come and join us. She was a counselor. She wasn't even a game developer. And then we added a 70-year-old man and lady, and after that, a 90-year-old woman. And more seniors contributed to the focus group testing. All right, so we had our team gathered and we brainstormed. And the end result was a Familie Geheim, which is called Family Secrets in English. It became a story-based location quest to solve the mystery of a missing son. Players had to go to their local pub, the park, or the gallery to find clues and unlock more of the story and its characters. Okay? So this was very much an interactive Days of Our Lives. Set in the player's own hometown, and this is what made it special. I don't know why that's happening. And it was, what it was not was a GTA for seniors. It wasn't a COD, it wasn't a Flappy Birds or a Crossy Roads. The King of the Netherlands endorsed it. And now the game is being localized for seniors in other Dutch towns. This game would not have been made if women and men of all ages had not stepped up when our more traditional colleagues stepped back. So we were willing to take the risks. We had the end user firmly in our sights, so much so that we made them co-creators of the content. And just a few weeks ago, a senior product manager for a popular children's game app, hint, hint, we heard her speak yesterday. I heard her say that the most valuable skill in a game designer is to have user-centered design skills. That means that empathy and understanding facilitate this skill, all right? User-centered design. And this is a skill that comes naturally to game developers with the Myers-Briggs feeling trait. Now, I can just see you thinking types and judging types say, where's the proof? Show me those stats. All right, and that's fair enough. Now I'm going to come to my research. My research has involved, it's PhD research, by the way. It involves observing and interviewing game development teams. And this is one way of tackling my thesis question, which was, how does developer personality affect game concept production? And how can we use it to more effectively generate game IP? And here is a synopsis of the experiment that was conducted. So we got two teams of junior game developers, and we had them prototype a racing game or a driving game. They could do either or. And why racing? All right, why pick that genre? It's not because I loved pole position in Daytona when I grew up, or that I worked on about half a dozen racing games myself. No, according to Jensen, racing games provide the most demographically democratic opportunity for gameplay. Racing and driving games provide a ubiquitous baseline of understanding of how to play the game. So this baseline crosses gender, age, and culture, and the racing genre is a blank canvas on which to study personalities in game development. All right, so that's what I was looking for, a genre that did not have a race or gender or age focus or predilection. So the University of Sheffield, like I mentioned before, had been personality profiling their software engineers for years, and a Sorbonne researcher, Sorbonne's in France, by the way, just university in France, Frederica Krupa had recently personally tested 16 European female game developers. Okay, so she focused her test on those. And in both the studies, NTJ, so intuitive thinking and judging personalities, were predominant. So for the first time in my research, I would be analyzing the effects of personality on the video game content and the design process itself. So we had around 20 game developers put up their hands to make a game based on the Mongol Rally. It's a wacky UK to Ulaanbaatar race. Anybody familiar with it, by the way? Happens every year. I was lucky enough to be in Ulaanbaatar about 8 years ago when the race finished, and that's what gave me the idea. I thought, wow, fantastic game. And I contacted them, and they said, yeah, they'd be interested in a prototype. So myself and a research assistant, who, by the way, was an INTJ, Thomas, he was also an IGF finalist, so I figured he knew what it would take to study game developers. We observed and videoed the developers through 6 days of concept development and prototyping up until the alpha. So it was the alpha version of the vertical slice. And they had to produce the prototype up until beta. Okay, so we videoed them and observed them up until alpha. And then after alpha, the key team members were interviewed and the beta milestone progressed. Now, we did not personality test them until post alpha, by the way. But what we found was that one team was homogeneous, white male and predominantly NTJ, and the other team was heterogeneous in terms of gender and personality diversity. Okay, so this was great. This is like a bonus. And this is very much the homogeneous team. Now, just ignore for the moment the female who was in that, because she was added to the team post alpha, because when something happened, which I'll tell you about just shortly, they decided that they needed some more diversity in their team, and they added her post alpha. And also the young man in the middle with the yellow on his T-shirt, he was also added post-alpha. Now, their game was called Passage to Mongolia, and as I said, they had personality homogeneity. You can see in this chart of the traits that judging, thinking, intuition are high up there, and so is introversion. Okay, so INTJs definitely are predominant. There are some perceiving and feeling, by the way, and a little bit of sensing and some extroversion. The feeling, the two FPs, or feeling, perceiving people were male. Okay. However, there's little communication between the departments of design, art, and programming. What communication there was sarcastic and vitriolic, especially when a feeling member was engaged. Each department produced very high-quality work, like incredibly high quality, but the production work was siloed in the different departments. The concept control was actually held very tightly by the INTJ design lead. So there wasn't a shared design input. They actually attempted to share input on the design early on the first day of the discussion, brainstorming discussion, and it was completely shut down by the INTJ designer. Now, when they delivered, and alpha, they didn't make their alpha, by the way, they missed their deadline. They did deliver for the beta after they introduced the female who was a sensing, and after they introduced a new team lead. But in order to make beta, they had to dump 70% of their design and 50% of the artwork that they had already made. All right? And now, does this sound familiar to anybody? Sounds familiar to me. This has happened. As I said, they had to add extra team members with, to add a little bit more variety. They kind of saw the light. They did very well by the time they got to beta, by the way. They were able to pull it around, but they had to cut a lot of work. This is the second team. Right? So a little bit more diverse, a little bit bigger, actually. Same brief. So they had personality diversity. You can see that. They had far more feeling. That was one big difference, a little bit, and equal feeling and equal thinking in their team makeup. Still quite high on the judging, still quite high on the introversion and intuition. Really, the main point of difference here is the gender and feeling. But in terms of personality, it's mainly feeling. There was considerable design discussion and frequent changes in vision. Again and again and again, they would come up with new ideas. And we were beginning to despair, those of us who were observing, starting to panic on their behalf, that they wouldn't actually agree on anything. The prototype, that when it did finish, was far less polished than the other teams. It was less polished artistically, and it was glitchy technically, but it was far more innovative in gameplay and actually a lot more fun. What did happen in this team was the NTJs that did exist in this team, they took responsibility for producing the critical output. Okay, so it was still very highly contingent on a very good trait that NTJs have, which is they're driven and they're focused. What is different from this one is where the content was cut in order to make beta. In this particular case, it tripled from alpha to beta. So they got one particular aspect or one key critical gameplay feature right. They got their open world map done, and then they added 3 more modes of gameplay on it, including trippy mode, which only you can do in Netherlands, by the way. Can you have trippy mode in the Netherlands and it get through? And it was very fun to play. Let's see, what else? All right, so this one grew by 2/3. The other one had to be cut by 2/3. It's the difference, main difference. Now, so we have team A and team B. Now, I'm not sort of telling you who. I can't reveal exactly who has which personality type, all right? But now I'm going to tell you some of the conclusions. There was about 25 different conclusions that we drew from this experiment, a lot of them surprising. I'm going to share with you maybe about 6. In combination, the team showed about 70% displaying intuition, 60% thinking, and 70% judging. This is totally aligned with the University of Sheffield's results. And it is proof that NTJ does dominate game development, as well as software engineering, regardless of gender. Okay, regardless of gender. The presence of sensing, feeling, or perceiving traits in a team correlates with increased discussion and innovation. The feeling trait exhibited in all 3 of the female game developers. All 3 of them in the alpha study. The people with intuition and thinking traits created a game he or she preferred to make, while the NFs, the intuition feelings, were consistently user-centric. They kept bringing the team back again and again, but what about our player? Is this what they really want? The most valuable team member is the one who pulls together the others through communication and mediation. They are the natural leaders, whether they have the official role or not. So you had some people who were leading these teams, and they were not the actual production leads. By coincidence, both of these leading team members, or bridging members as I like to call them, stood in the middle of their team photos. And if you recall my team photo, where was I standing? And they did not know. They did not know their personality profiles. These team photos were taken without any of that knowledge on their behalf. It just happens naturally. And what we also noticed with individuals with similar personality traits gravitate towards each other and sit in close proximity at the workplace. And get this, they did not know what their personality traits were. And this is where they were sitting. This is where they naturally chose to sit. So the INFPs in Team A were sitting together. The INTJs sat together. And the ESTJs sat in proximity, if they could. All the F feeling traits, they chose to sit together. within close proximity. And then if the Fs couldn't sit together, then the Ps gravitated towards each other, the perceivings. I mean, this is gold. And this last observation introduces my final point. Like is attracted to light, we sit next to each other, and we hire each other. In order to increase diversity in the game studio, we need diversity in our interviewing panels. This means diversity in race, age, gender, as well as personality, most especially in personality, because equal opportunity employment in personality may well lead to equal opportunity employment in the other demographic categories and increased retention rates. If there had been more feeling personality traits in the studio I worked in 12 years ago, traits that female developers often have, perhaps more women would have stayed and thrived. Right. Last week, I co-judged a music game competition. It was called the Connected Music City Challenge. I don't know if we have any people here from it. The judges included IBM and Innovize, so, heavy hitters. And the most innovative and winning product, Wandering Sound, also had the most diverse team development. Now, I don't have a team photo of them, and they didn't want me to tell you about their game, because they're still getting it together. But they delivered very good prototypes, and all the judges were like going, wow, this is pretty innovative. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of a rundown of, these are two of the team members, but there's obviously more. They had 4 females and 4 males on the team. The breakdown, I got a breakdown of 5. There was a female ESFJ, so extroverted, sensing, feeling, judging, 60 years of age. A male under the age of 30, ESTJ, so the sensing is different. Another male programmer under the age of 30, INTP, very typical of programmers. Okay, so this is what we would normally expect. Another programmer musician, INFP, so feeling trait. Another designer, female, ENFP. So feeling again. And then there's some more females and another male on the team. So again, this is another example of how diversity can innovate. So feeling, sensing, and perceiving, these are traditionally traits not associated with game development or software development, but they were represented in this team. So this is my challenge. Do we wait for innovative teams to combine organically and accidentally, which is what some of these did? Or do we orchestrate their potential and fertilize their growth? Leadership courses such as the Myers-Briggs, they use the Myers-Briggs typology, and it's also used in mainstream business. So why don't we use it in the game industry? I'll tell you a little bit of a reason why, because we're cowboys for a start. We don't like to be pigeonholed. I know that Ubisoft, when I presented this to them a few years ago, they had concerns over social engineering teams and overly social engineering teams. So I think it's useful in the hiring process. For sure, but it's still very important to let teams organically combine. And if a team does fail, or in other words, doesn't get things according to deadline, or you have to cut 50 to 70% of the content, well, then you can use the personality testing to see if there's something that you can fix in that, and then recombine them. All right. So at this point, I'm going to say thank you and have questions, and I'll also play a clip from the movie after we have a few questions, if you want. And these are also some of my sources. Any questions before? Yeah?
When you said that the natural leaders on digital bridges as well
Mm-hmm.
were gravitating to the middle of those photos, did you know what those people were, like what their personality types were?
No, not at that time.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I mean, like, was there any sort of commonality between those?
Oh, yeah, okay. They were extroverts, and those two particular ones.
You said you noticed it as a trend.
Yes, yes.
Your photo.
Extroverts and intuition and feeling, still judging, but intuition or sensing was some of those traits. They were not INTJs, but INTJs were critical departmental leaders. Does that make sense? But they weren't the mediators or the bridgers.
So not holding them all together.
No. Yes.
So I've read that there's a fair bit of, I guess, criticism of Myers-Briggs
Yes.
these days, and that there's some maybe improved metrics that people were using more often. But I guess in academia you tend to just stick with the ones that you can compare with previous work and so on. But are there other scales that you would, or typologies that you would recommend to maybe try using as well?
Yeah, there's the Big Five, and there's also the Washington University Sentence Completion Test, which is quite comprehensive. Unfortunately, neither of them are used across businesses. So I've been participating in the Governor's Leadership Foundation course, which is a yearly course. It's run in all the different states. And they use MBTI. They use Myers-Briggs, as well as the Washington University Sentence Completion. Yeah. Yes?
So you see a correlation between programmers and the NTJs.
Yes, that's correct.
So you were talking about what was the studio that was Ubisoft was the one that was kind of considered social engineering.
They were.
Well, I hear about a lot of studios that do strike teams now, and strike teams are typically made up of so we've got a couple of programmers, a couple of artists, a designer, producer, and such like that. Isn't that basically then social engineering because the artists are very likely not going to be NTJs?
No, there are artists who are NTJs as well.
I figured there would be.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. In the teams that we studied, let me come back. And can I just say it was very hard for my INTJ research assistant not to interfere and try and fix them. I finally allowed him to do it like in the last 2 hours. There were artists, especially pretty much that whole middle. You can see were artists. Yeah.
So then, that's really interesting because, like, as a producer, I'm instantly like, obviously there's something to be gained by mixing up the personalities, right? And so I very much start going, is there anything wrong with social engineering?
Yeah. Well, when you go to Ubisoft Paris, they're very much, because of the culture.
Yes.
This excited them. This concept excited them very much, right? Yes. But it was a lot of debate over how they would implement it. Yes. And when in the hiring process or team reforming process. And they decided that postmortems were the most appropriate, and when they had to redeploy a team, they would remix it up. Yeah. So that was their decision.
Yeah, because like my ideal situation would be like knowing what personality types people were, and then having seating so that people would mix up and have conversations, right? So you could actually get that nice mix, rather than having, okay, well, this side of the room is all the NTJs, and this side of the room is everybody else, right?
Oh yeah. It's hard. Also, there is some pushback. 10% of your game developers, at least, will refuse to be personality tested. Yeah. I tried to implement it someplace else at AIE, and 10% were very vocal in not wanting to do this, and they felt it infringed on their personal lives and etc.
That's totally fair.
Yeah, but it is a mainstream thing to do in other businesses. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
take on this sort of personality profiling for the benefit of
Yes.
benefit or deficit of their companies?
Yes, I would. At least it's a known factor. You know, I'm not necessarily thinking you should act on it, but I think you should do personality profiling of your candidates, the shortlisted ones. So that not necessarily make it. I mean, you can positively discriminate if you want to call it that, but it's more or less raising the awareness and going, okay, you know, we've decided to pick all INTJs. You know, we know what's going to happen if we put them all together. Let's see what we can do about it. That kind of thing.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting because some people have pushed back, as you mentioned. Is there anything you can do to encourage that to give it a try?
Yeah, take out the fear factor. They think it's going to, especially in the games industry, we're so volatile. They think it might, you know, developers think that it might affect their employment opportunities, what games you put them on, that kind of thing. So I think it's taking out that fear of the unknown and how it will affect them in the future. So there's something like that. There's something to be said for that. Yeah.
So really, I mean, gender is kind of like a proxy for this, right? Like, there's so much diversity within genders, in personality types.
Yes.
That, you know, just kind of hiring a lot of women, you might be just hiring a lot of NTJs.
You might be hiring a lot of NTJs.
And you might be missing out on a lot of guys who maybe are more feeling and sensitive.
Absolutely.
And so I was like wondering, you know, there's not much attention on the idea that there are actually men who would be really valuable to your team that have those qualities that probably are being just as discriminated against in the games industry as women are.
That's why I'm doing this presentation.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, this is, you know, and I came from that place 12 years ago where I was the only woman on the team, and I got into education because I thought, damn it, we're going to get more women in there. It's going to change the industry. It doesn't change the industry. It's not unless you have diversity in personality. That's when I came to that realization. Yeah.
My question was a little related. I think generally, culturally, people sort of associate feeling with femininity and thinking with masculinity. But I'm wondering if the research shows that as Myers-Briggs defines feeling and thinking, is there actually any validity to that idea that women tend to be more feelers and men tend to be more thinkers?
Yeah, that's a good question. That part I don't know. All right. So I was only prepared to look at the University of Sheffield's Frederica's work as well as mine. I don't trust necessarily the general populace, but it's easy enough to go in and find out, you know, in which country, you know, you have more. I also decided not to focus on gender. I decided to focus more on the personality types and then see, you know, and that's when I discovered that there is a mix of genders with feeling.
So what would be the ideal way in your mind to apply this knowledge?
Yeah, that's for you guys to figure out. That is, honestly, that's for you guys to figure out. I mean, I have to defend my work, by the way, in England, because I did it through the University of Arts in London. And I'll be going in January to defend this principle, because this has not been done in the game development research before. So I'll be defending it, and then I'm hoping to apply it. So please, if you know how to apply this, let me know. Without offending too many other people. Ron, did you have a...
No, I was thinking, sorry.
Okay. Now, are you guys open to seeing this VR clip? Just as a... I mean, if you're not, please walk out. I don't want to... I wasn't allowed to show it at TEDx, by the way. So let me just bring this over. So I'll just position it there and then not be able to see it. Okay, that was a bad move. Let's see, what's a keyboard command for play? Space. Oh, heck. The pointer has to be in there. Well, so much for this. I didn't play test this. Take this. We got it?
Move to the left.
How about that?
Up.
It's hard when you can't see.
Teamwork.
This
It's gone off the screen.
It's got off the screen, yeah. Oh, there it is.
Hit it. Now.
is it good?
I was there a second ago. Just up a little bit.
And then make a click. And then it should be.
And then press spacebar.
I did.
Spacebar down.
Spacebar.
No. Let me just grab it back. Hold a second. Yeah.
Started playing the drone.
Yeah, I do have to drag and drop it. Unfortunately, no, drag and drop it. That sounds a little bit silly. So hold it. I've just lost my cursor again. Oh, here we are. Woo, this is hard. Okay, so I'll start playing it from about here. And, oops, wrong thing. So that was just a little clip, and the go to task. Did everybody catch the what I said? The link to go to see how she goes. The comments, by the way, are quite awful. Oh, that's not on the website. That's an early prototype for the DK2. It's now going to be produced on the Vive. That was too much for people, so you got to see a preview that's not actually in there. But yeah, so if you want to go see more, go to see her there. All right. Did you have any questions about what it was like to make it? It's pretty heavy, but. You can understand now why we really had to go there and cross over the comfort zone. And I think that people with feeling traits are actually really quite more prepared to take those risks. Yes, Carl. Originally in our mind, we were thinking, okay, the audience is going to be our friends, colleagues, and family who can't quite get what we go through. But when we talked to psychologists and we learned that it was exposure therapy was like a legit thing, we thought, oh, well, trauma survivors, we can put them in this. So because you work backwards through time, you actually start off a year down the track after the attack, and you're pretty normal. You know, you've gotten over everything, and you work backwards through time in nightmare levels. And to the moment of the attack itself. So the game actually eases you through the process. So by the time you get to here, you kind of, it's towards the end of the game. Yeah.
So we develop a lot of VR games, and quite often, like from my perspective, that I find it incredibly fascinating because VR is so immersive that to be put in that situation would be actually terrifying.
Yeah.
And have you found, like, developing that, like, do people disconnect themselves from what's going on? Because I know a lot of horror games, like, the moment people start getting scared, they disconnect themselves because it's like there's this lizard brain kicks in, right? You know, this isn't real, you have to be scared. And so I'm really genuinely curious about what happens in a situation like that.
Well, this is the most intense part, but I wanted to show it to you for that reason, because you have to go that far. There is no disconnect. This moment happens, and you don't see this, but you have to choose between two tunnels, right? And so you might disconnect and go back. Okay, I'm going to replay this again. So, and this is what you do in your mind afterwards. By the way, if only I'd chosen the other path. All right. So what you do is you do that in this game, and it still happens. It still happens. No matter what choice you make, it still happens.
That message is there.
And that message is there. And that's a difficult message for the trauma survivor. It takes us like almost a year or 2 years to get through that. Yes?
Do you think it's going to be mostly people who've experienced that trauma or who are at least sympathetic to it, or are you thinking that it's going to be changing?
Well, if you look at some of the comments that I've looked at online, there will be some voyeuristic people who play it for whatever reason. They want to know what it feels like. It could be the survivalist types, you know, you sort of say, well, I want to know. We've had a lot of positive feedback from people who do want to use it for the purposes of understanding what it is to be a trauma survivor. There's also, you know, it's good also for bullying. Bullying game, someone suggested road rage. Understand road rage. So there's quite a few interesting applications that people, to my knowledge, even though this was done 2 years ago, by the way, VR hasn't been used for this kind of purpose yet. It may be at the moment in development. Yeah, so my personal ambition is the next game I make, because it's going to be that Daisy Duke driving game, by the way. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. It was really wonderful.